Hi, everybody. This is Kim and Jax with Midnight Gypsies. And we have a special guest, James Bartley, and he is going to jump on with us. And we're going to be talking about extraterrestrials. We're going to talk about Area 51. We're going to talk about alien human hybridization. We're going to talk about different types of aliens or ETs. And then we are going to talk about the reptilian agenda, the reptilians, and the reptilian overlordship. And so, without further ado, here is our good friend James Bartley. Hi, James.
Hi, James. Welcome.
Thank you, Kim and Jax. Great to be here. Really excited about this. Looking forward to sharing with your audience.
So you're in Australia, and it's like 5, almost 6 a.m. So
yeah,
thanks
just
for
turned
waking
6
up.
1 a.m. Thanks.
I'm
I'm glad to be here. It's a good time
Thanks
for
for getting up.
Absolutely.
So let's get started. Let's jump in. James, you are a fascinating researcher. You have been researching abductions and the abduction phenomenon for over 25 years. You are an abductee yourself. You also work with Milabs and other military abductees. If I get the verbiage wrong, you could correct me. But you've also studied under some other awesome Barbara Bartley, and wasn't there another one? Candy
Dr.
or
Turner. Candy Turner
Carla
was
Turner.
Barbara's protege, and I became friends with Carla.
And so you have studied under the best of the best. You now have the COSMIC SWITCHBOARD, which is the link is in the post here, which is an amazing website where people can go to get a wealth of information about everything from Bigfoot to cryptids to paranormal aliens, and you just have a wealth of information. You have guests from around the world on your podcasts, and we're just so happy to have you always, James. And so,
Yeah, absolutely.
first time meeting Jax. First time meeting Jax.
Yeah.
So this is a thrill.
It's an honor.
So let's jump in.
Thank you.
James, tell us about your abduction experiences as a kid or a young adult. Go ahead and jump in.
The experiences I had go back at least to the age of 4. I had this encounter. We were living in Texas at the time, near the Gulf of Mexico. My dad was in the Navy. He was either stationed at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi or what was recently known as Naval Air Facility Kingsville. He alternated between the two. And so I can't remember exactly what base he was at the time, but he was in either one or the other. And this happened in the autumn sometime, because my dad was wearing the darker seaman's uniform, which is only worn in the autumn and in the winter. The white uniform for more formal occasions is worn in the summer months and the spring, right? So my mom was ironing my dad's dark Navy seaman's uniform in the living room. So it was sometime in the autumn or the winter. I was in my bedroom playing. I was by myself, and I remember this distinctly. A lot of this came back to me after I'd had what I thought was a failed regression, 1992, 1993 timeframe, thereabouts. What had happened was the regression, which I thought was a failure, kind of shook things up in my subconscious, and then this whole experience, which I'm going to relate to you, unfolded kind of like in a zip file, right? Now, what was interesting, and this is not unusual, others have reported this same thing, these formative, profoundly impactful experiences can stay with us consciously for years and years and years, and then we mysteriously forget them, right? And that was the case with me. So back to the story, I was approximately 4 years old. I was playing in my room. It was around dusk. I remember distinctly I was standing by the window, and we had Venetian blinds, and the blinds were partially open. I could see the waning rays of sunlight coming in from through the Venetian blinds, and I could actually see dust motes hanging suspended in the air in the bedroom that were lit up by the rays of the sun coming in through the window, and it was dusk. I don't recall having a light on in the room, and then I suddenly felt a presence, and then I turned to look, and then there was this small being hovering in the air. If you'd ever seen Katarina Wilson's second book, I think it is, Alien Jigsaw Supplement for Researchers, she has a sketch drawing in there of what she calls, I think she called it a type 3 gray, but in outline and in shape, morphology, it was pretty much what I saw, except what I saw was not gray, although I referred to it much later, for many years afterwards, as a little gray man. It was actually brownish, and it was very small, diminutive. It was suspended in the air. Kind of wrinkled features, around, I wouldn't say a slit for a mouth, but more of a round kind of orifice. Big round eyes, not the big teardrop shape, actually black eyepiece coverings that are commonly reported with the grays. These were more round, and then and it wasn't a big bulbous head. It was more proportioned to its body. And so when I saw it, rather than be frightened, I was just a territorial kid, right? I mean, who is this? What is this? Why is it in my bedroom, around all my stuff, my toys, my belongings, right? So that's the way my mind was working. And I asked it, what are you doing here? Get out. This is my bedroom. These are my toys, right? Then it began talking to me telepathically. But I didn't really want to hear it, right? So I went to the living room where my mom was, and I told it that I'm going to tell my mom about it, right? And then the telepathic message came back, clear as a bell. Go ahead, she won't see me anyway, right? So I went to the living room, and my mom was ironing my dad's dark navy seaman's uniform, and I told her there's a little man in my bedroom, right, in my room. And I said, come, take a look. And of course my mom just thought I was hallucinating or having this flight of fancy or something. Eventually what I did was I literally grabbed her by the elbow, pulled her to my bedroom, flung open the bedroom door, and I said, see, look. And of course there was nothing there. My mom storms off, irritated, goes back to the ironing of my dad's uniform. I go back into the bedroom, close the door behind me, and this being appears again, right? And it had this expression on its face, which I could only describe as like sardonic or like I told you so kind of thing, right? So it's right there in front of me, and then I mean at head level, literally. And I was bigger than it, so it had to levitate in order to be at head level with me. And it said to me a few things, and the last bit that I got, which I remember distinctly, was, you have some destiny to fulfill, you're going to be doing something important in the future, etc., etc. Now, many abductees and contactees have been told the exact same thing by different types of ETs. So, and not knowing anything about this consciously as a 4-year-old boy, I just took it with a grain of salt, irritated that my mom couldn't see this thing, right? Made it seem like I was just making it all up. That was where my headspace was. So it leaves me with that message. You're here to do something very important for the future. You have an important destiny, etc., etc. And then it literally just faded from sight. And then for years after that, and that was when I was 4 years old in Corpus Christi, Texas, right there by the Gulf of Mexico. And then eventually we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area because my dad, being in the Navy, was transferred to Naval Air Station Alameda, where I don't know about now, but I think they've since come back. But back in the old days, in the early 70s, that's where some of the Pacific Fleet carriers were stationed at, Naval Air Station Alameda. And my dad had served on 2 different aircraft carriers, the USS Coral Sea and the USS Ranger, and both were home ported there in Alameda. So eventually my family moved to the San Francisco Bay Area because my dad was stationed there, and I think this was after his 2 tours in Vietnam, where he served in the Brown Water Navy. So, by now I'm in the first, second grade. I'm starting to have friends and starting to get to know people, and I would tell the kids around me, my gang, so to speak, my buddies. I would tell them about this little gray man. Now, keeping in mind that it was actually brown, but the way my mind perceived and remembered things, and it was dusk, and it was kind of a dark room, non-illuminated. Little gray guy, right? Little gray man. So I told virtually everyone I knew that was my friend about this little gray man. Nobody laughed, nobody scoffed back then. Kids were a lot more open-minded. They hadn't suffered all the indoctrination and brainwashing that the kids today do. So I told this story to virtually everybody that I considered a friend, and then mysteriously, like I alluded to earlier, it just disappeared from my conscious memory. Gone. And then what happened was I had a missing time experience in actually, we live in Daly City right next to San Francisco, and then moved to San Jose, 50 miles south, because my dad was going to be reassigned from Naval Air Station Alameda to Naval Air Station Moffett in the Sunnyvale Mountain View area of the Bay Area, which is the home of a lot of very spooky organizations. There's the Blue Cube, the National Security Agency / National Reconnaissance Office Satellite Tracking Facility. There's the Lockheed Missiles and Space Division there. There's a number of other spooky things there. It's no surprise that just a stone's throw away further south, Silicon Valley developed in that area also. So, we moved to San Jose because my dad was going to be reassigned to Naval Air Station Moffett, and it was in San Jose where I had a lot of experiences. So, 74, 75 time frame rolls around. I'm waking up with nosebleeds. Now just to go back a little bit, and I'll try to make this quicker because I want to get into the research aspect and not dwell so much on my own experiences. But getting back to my time in Daly City, I would wake up in bed with my underclothes, my underwear inside out and backwards, and I used to wear these one-piece pajamas that were gray. I mean, all I needed was the ears. I'd look like Bugs Bunny, right? It had the attached booties, the attached footwear at the bottom, and I would wake up in the morning and there would be stickers and dirt and clods of dirt stuck to the bottom of those booties, like as if I'd been outdoors during the night, right? I slept in an upper bunk. My older brother was in a lower bunk, and there were times when my family would find me, and I slept so deep back then. I mean, I would just go out like a light and nothing would wake me up. And my family would find me at times everywhere but my upper bunk bed. They'd find me. I used to, there was a metal desk that was pushed up against the bottom of the bunk bed. I would use that to climb up to the top, right? They would find me on top of the desk, they'd find me under the desk, they'd find me in the hallway outside, right? So numerous times they'd have to pick me up and put me back up there. And I would be completely oblivious to this. They would tell me about it the next morning. You were sleepwalking again. That's what everyone thought. I was always sleepwalking, right? And I would sleep talk in some weird foreign language that nobody would understand. So all that would happen in Daly City, and then we moved to San Jose because my dad's going to be reassigned, and then I began having, I mean, with me, the experiences were often cyclical. With hindsight, I can look back and say, and my heart goes out to some of these people that have the recurring, almost nightly type experiences, right, in one form or another. Mine were usually more cyclical. They'd come around every few years, but a lot of activity in a rather short period of time. And so 74, 75 time frame, which factors heavily into the wider research scheme of things. A lot of stuff happened. 73, 74, 75. I was having experiences with hindsight looking back. missing time experiences. There was one occasion when I was laying in bed when I felt paralysis. I felt a presence, and then I felt a cold metal probe being shoved up my nostril, and then felt this painful sensation. Kind of heard, quote unquote, a popping noise, and this has been described by many abductees. Felt extreme pain, then I blacked out, and the next morning my pillow was just covered in blood because this probe had been shoved up by my nose, presumably by some alien, right? So then I began having all these out-of-body experiences, which I've since come to understand was instigated, in part at least, by some of these ET races. I think it was an object lesson to show me, and by extension anyone who, listen to my story, that we are more than just flesh and blood, that we are essentially spiritual beings. And that's one of the stories, one of the takes, that if people study the great series of books written by Raymond Fowler about Betty Andreas and Luca, not only did she experience a lot of physical abductions, right, but she also experienced a lot of astral abductions where she was taken out of her body. Well, those kinds of things happen to me also, because fast forwarding a little bit now, and it's the late 70s going to the early 80s. I'm a freshman, I'm a sophomore in high school, years 9, 10 for our UK and Australian listeners and viewers, and I was having a lot of out-of-body experiences, and there were times I'd be laying in bed and these beams of light would come in from the ceiling and do the search pattern thing on the floor, and there were other nights I would see big illuminated triangles or big illuminated circles on my wall, right? So all that stuff was going on, and gradually, bit by bit, and in some cases more abrupt, it let me know that there was a lot going on in my life that I wasn't really sure of, and this instilled in me a certain degree of fear, trepidation, anxiety, as you can imagine, right? Even as a boy, I remember sleeping beneath a mound of blankets and pillows, a little air pocket underneath, and I would have the lights on in the bedroom, but there was me cowering underneath there because I was so kind of terrified of this nameless fear, dread, onset of evening, right? I used to, when I was a boy in Daly City, I used to set up, like, if you ever seen the Home Alone movies, right? It was like that, where I would set up all these booby traps and yarn and things, and like toys swinging down as booby traps, all this stuff I'd set up in my bedroom as a boy. It used to drive my family crazy because I felt that I was under siege at night at times, and there were these little green beings that I likened the leader to. If you remember, they were going old school now. If you remember the old vegetable cans with the big green kind of guy logo on the side of the can, kind of looked like a Tarzan looking guy, but he was green, and that's what it reminded me of, because the hordes of these little creatures, little humanoid green beings, would come out from beneath my bed at night. Another thing that terrified me. And the leader seemed to be taller, a little taller than the rest, and he had what looked like almost a George of the Jungle kind of, Jolly Green Giant. I think that was the name of the logo brand thing, and that's what it reminded me of. He looks like the Jolly Green Giant. And on one occasion, I got so tired of them messing with me at night, and disrupting my sleep, that this Jolly Green Giant character was standing on my bedroom floor looking at me really defiantly, right? And I just shoved my index finger into his chest, and get this, he grabbed my both sides of my index finger, gave it an almighty twist, and then I blacked out, and I woke up the next morning, my finger was aching, right? So things like that, bit by bit, it just changed my worldview about things. And silly me, I just assumed that my friends, my boyhood friends, underwent similar experiences, right? And so, when I raised these issues with them, I wasn't met with ridicule or anything. It was just like, kind of shocked silence, like, oh, I'm glad those things aren't happening to me. So I just assumed that others had these experiences. Everyone had these experiences. It can't just be me, you know what I mean? So anyway, fast forward to 1990. I'm spending a summer in Germany to learn the language, and try to learn the language anyway. And a couple of weeks before I was set to go back to California, to San Jose, I began having that creepy crawly feeling like I'm being watched sensation again, which happened a lot to me, right? So just hold that thought. I gotta do something really quick. Oh, I'm back. Anyway, so what happened was, in the weeks leading up to my return from that summer in Germany, right? I began feeling like I was being watched again, that prodromal feeling, that, prior to nightfall, prior to, sleepy time, I'm getting that creepy crawly feeling again that something is watching me. And so I began sleeping with the lights on again. I began doing things like that. And along the banks of the Rhine River there, this is the Black Forest. It's densely vegetated. It's densely forested, right? This is where the Hansel and Gretel stories come from, the Black Forest. So there was one stretch along the Rhine River there where they took the natural foliage, the trees and what have you, and kind of turned it into like a tunnel, and it's a stretch of about 100, 200 feet thereabouts, right? And it's right along the banks of the Rhine River. And I would have to walk through there at night sometimes, and I began sprinting through there, because the thought of walking slowly through this thing terrified me, right? So I would just run as fast as I could, and just to give you an idea of mentally and emotionally where I was at. And so eventually I flew back to California, and then this is September 1990, and in the span of just a matter of weeks, boom, 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 I had a series of what I now know to be ET encounters. A missing time episode where I was, reparked right in front of my front yard. A time when there was a ET looking at me through my TV. That was a whole nother story. And my brother was seeing the exact same image in his bedroom, right, on the other side of the house. And it culminated in a full-blown abduction experience when I woke up in bed, and that there was 3 what I now know to be reptilian grays. They weren't just the ubiquitous grays everyone talks about. These were what Dr. Carla Turner, Candy Turner, referred to as chicken claws, because they didn't have fingers with long nails. They had claws, right? 3 of them. And so I woke up, and there was 3 of these in my bedroom, one at the foot of the bed, one by the door, and one right by the side of my bed, right? Where usually I have a little TV up on a chair, but for whatever reason, I guess they moved it out of the way or something. And so I wake up, and they had like a blue vest on. They were grayish with somewhat of a bluish tint, but mostly gray. The classic, big heads and the black wraparound, almost teardrop-shaped eyes, which are really eye coverings, black eye coverings. And I found myself with 3 of these in my bedroom, and I was immobilized. I couldn't move anything from the neck down, and all I could do was just turn my head to the wall and just pinch my eyes shut, right? And after a while, I just turned and looked. They're still there, right? They didn't go anywhere. So long story short, I'm cutting out a lot of stuff that happened. Also, they brought in this horrific, hideous-looking female hybrid being. I'm not even going to go into that. I've talked about it in other interviews, but eventually they hauled me up into this huge spaceship. I'm presuming it was a huge spaceship, and I came to semi-consciousness with my head down, and I was being moved along. There were grays on either side of me and a reptilian gray in front, and my vision was like limited to just a few feet around me, peripheral vision, and my head was tilted down, so I could only see like the legs of these beings. I don't know if I was being levitated or floated, or if, my feet were just scraping along on the ground. I don't know. I don't recall the sensation of actually walking. And then we round this turn, and then we go into I felt we were going into a big open space, and going down like this central aisle, and on either side, in the periphery of my vision, I could see like beds, right? And I could see other people laying in these beds, presumably, I'm guessing, other abductees. But it seemed to me that there were other beings laying there that didn't even look human, like they were abducting other aliens or something. Okay, talk about a twist there. So eventually they got me to this one part of the craft where they started doing all these things to me, and so eventually they sent me back, and when I woke up the next morning, I was a basket case, as you can imagine, because I clearly remembered the Greys being in the bedroom, clearly remembered what happened when I was up, some of the things that I experienced up in the ship, and then to round out the story of how I got here and why I wound up becoming a researcher. A lot of serendipitous, synchronous things happened that ultimately led me to connect with key people in my life. Eve Lorgan, who I'm sure you've heard about, and Barbara Bartholick, Dr. Carla Turner. I do believe there was a karmic relationship with them, that I was meant to reunite with them and work with them, for a certain length of time. So what happened was the following morning, I'd promised my friend, I think his car was in the shop or something, I promised him that I'd give him a lift the next morning, because I used to do the go to college in a day and then do I was working night shift for a while, right? So I told my friend that I was going to pick him up because his car was in the shop. Now it just so happened in his neighborhood, the notice went out that they're going to have street sweepers come through, right? So everyone was instructed to put their cars either on the driveway or in their garages. So on that morning, after that horrific experience the night before, I'm sitting parked in front of my friend's driveway waiting for him to come out, and there was not a car in sight on that whole street, and it just added to the sense of isolation. It's like, I'm the only one here, where is everybody? I was freaking out, right? And so when my friend came out of his house and he climbed into the passenger seat, the first words out of my mouth were, I had a horrible dream last night. And that's what the aliens told me. When I was like laying there immobilized in bed and pinching my eyes shut, they're just telling me, in the language of the vernacular, don't worry about it, you're just having a nightmare. Just go back to sleep, as if, right? So when my friend gets in the car, the first thing I say to him, and I kept repeating over and over, until I dropped him off, was, I had a horrible nightmare. I had a horrible nightmare. And that's what set off this whole thing, because in order to lessen and diminish the fear, right, my natural default setting is to research, read. So in order to regain some semblance of control, so I began going to this is when B. Dalton's bookstore was pretty big. I don't know if they still have that anymore in America, but there was this mall, Eastridge Mall, in east side of San Jose. It was quite a drive, a half-hour drive for me, but I used to go there a lot because they had a good book selection, and I went there and I basically cleaned out all their alien abduction books. The one that I saved for last was Communion, because I just didn't like the the cover of the book, right? But I read all the books about Betty and Drayson and everything I can get my hands on in order to try to gain some understanding. And then another key aspect of my life was when I moved from San Jose, went to San Diego, and eventually became a member of the San Diego UFO Society, because the director, the two directors, original directors, Sean and then Rob succeeded him. They became good friends of mine, and Sean was extremely well connected. I mean, the researchers and investigators that I'd been reading about, whose books I'd read, he was friends with these guys. He called them up, right? He was buddies. Oh, I'm going to go talk to so-and-so. I got to give him a ring right now. I've been reading that guy's book, So I got plugged into a serious investigative group, the San Diego UFO Society, and that's where I began networking. Because finally, remember how I told you when I was younger no one laughed at me? Well, by the time 1990 rolled around, attitudes changed every time I brought this subject up. Now what was interesting was, especially amongst, because I had different sets of friends, my neighborhood friends, my party friends, my college friends, right? And my college friends, and some of these guys knew me from when I went to school with them in London, right? So they knew I guess at one time they thought of me as a somewhat switched on guy, but when I started raising this issue of aliens kidnapping people in the middle of the night, just the guffaws of laughter, you know what I mean? So all the credibility I'd built up as being kind of a smart guy in the past, that went out the window, right? likewise with some of my neighborhood friends. James is talking about aliens again. So when I finally moved to San Diego and met others who'd had alien abduction experiences and ET encounters and who actively researched this stuff, it was like a breath of fresh air. It's like, finally, I'm amongst my own people again, you know what I mean? So anyway, that led me onto this investigative journey. Got to know Barbara Bartley. We were dear friends. She was my spiritual mama. I talked to her all the time on the phone. We shared a lot of information. And I already knew about the reptilians in my research because you can't help. If you're a serious alien abduction researcher, and some of the big names in the alien abduction field not only shied away from the reptilians, but they made a point of being dismissive about the subject, marginalizing the subject, which to me always is a red flag, because you cannot discount eyewitness testimony from countless people who've had encounters with reptilians going back down through the ages. Okay, that's not scientific. That's not following the scientific method of, okay, grays, oh, reptilian, okay, we'll discount this part. That's called cherry picking in the intelligence community, where you actively only search certain types of information which suits or fits your agenda you're trying to push. That's cherry picking. And that's what happened with a lot of researchers. Barbara Bartley was a pariah, basically, even though she was the godmother of alien abduction research, doing it even before Bud Hopkins. Barbie had been doing it for over 30 years, right? She was doing cattle mutilation research, etc., etc. She knew about Milabs long before a lot of people knew about Milabs. A lot of people don't realize that Barbara had her own kind of deep black military, experiences. So I became good friends with Barbara, and I'd already heard a lot about the reptilians from other people in when I mean the San Diego UFO Society, I mean by extension the desert Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, high desert of Southern California. So our network was very large, right? And then I teamed up with Evie Lorgan locally, and she and I were doing research together. And then I teamed up with a buddy of mine, Craig Bowers, who lived in Vegas at the time. He and I used to go out to Mount Charleston. We used to go out to Little Alien. We used to go out to Area 51 nearby. And he and I had this big misadventure. Some other time, if you'd like, we can get him on the show. We can both tell you about it. But usually everyone comes to the Highway 357 area, and then they go by Rachel, and then from there they go by the Black Mailbox and Groom Road and all that stuff, right? Well, what we did was we came up due south through the Pahranagat Wildlife Preserve, because on the map, if you look at it, S4 Papoose Mountain Range, everyone talks about the Groom Mountain Range, but Bob Lazar and Dan Purich, who we were talking about before the show started, Kim, was the microbiologist who worked with that alien J-Rod in the biosphere at S4. But anyway, it was S4 we were interested in, right? So we stupidly thought that somehow we can gain access to arguably the most highly secure facility on the planet, right? And we looked at a map, and if we go north through the Pahranagat Wildlife Preserve, there's the Papoose Mountain Range right there. We can get in. I mean, this is kind of crazy stuff we were thinking, right? And long story short, driving along a sunken road, there were jagged boulders there, blew a tire, and we're already within sight of the Papoose Mountain Range. We're heading towards it, right? On a sunken road. Tire blows out, and almost simultaneously, steam starts billowing out from beneath the hood. Long story short, that was about 11 o'clock at night. Fortunately, we brought some camping gear with us, and we had one bottle of water each to share to get out of there. This is early July, right, in Nevada, right? So about 10:30, 11 at night, we marched out of there, and it wasn't a straight line. It was like ridges, a lot of zigzagging. Finally made it out to we were heading for Alamo, right? And finally, the next morning, after the sun came up and we were dog tired, a couple of gals came along, right? They were going to check on their livestock, their cows or whatever, and they saw me and my friend struggling down the road. They gave us a lift to the fish and game place, right? And we talked to the guy, the Fish and Game guy who drove us to this bar and grill slash auto shop place right there on Alamo. You're probably familiar with it if you go up there a lot. And this fishing wildlife guy, when we told him what happened to us, he said he and his wife had parked not too far from that area that we were at, and then he and his wife had pulled off at a lookout point and were looking around. They came back and steam was billowing out from beneath their the hood of their car, because the same thing had happened to them. Right now, he drops Craig and I off at that bar and grill slash auto shop in Alamo, and then the old guy behind the bar, serving up the food and all that. I guess people just thought he was a crazy old man because he's like muttering to himself constantly, yada yada yada. When we talked about what happened to us, now first of all, the Fish and Game guy said, "Oh, out there," meaning where we just come from. People who'd gone out there in the past, and cell phones were not really common back then. People had died out there because something happens to the radiator, steam billows out from their car, and the Fish and Wildlife guy told me there was a lady not too long before who died out there because her car similarly broke down in an exactly similar fashion, which I'm now convinced, and have been for some time, that there's some kind of directed energy weapon that zaps people's auto ignition, but also somehow causes the radiator fluid to boil over or whatever, which accounts for all the steam billowing out from under. Because it happened to the Fish and Game guy, probably happened to the lady who died out there that he told us about. And then when we're at the bar and grill, that old guy that's muttering to himself, everyone thinks it's crazy. When we told him what happened to us, he starts talking about, oh, that happens a lot out there. People go out there and then the steam builds out from the hood of the car. Some people think the government's behind it, yada yada yada. Me and my friend are like, oh, So long story short, we had to mount a rescue operation. So he had to call up his friend in Vegas to bring up 3 large jugs of water, right? And then she come up in her car, and then we go in back to where we came from with a battery, a car battery. We told her to bring a car battery, and then go up there, put the new battery in. And I mean, we're on the clock. We're scared. We're worried that what happened to his truck could happen to the new car we just brought up there, right? So anyway, we get the new car battery into his truck, and then we just get the hell out of there. Don't even look in the rearview mirror, right? So long story short, and George Knapp talked about this in relation to Area 51, which is not too far from Papoose. He said that they have sensor detections, motion detectors. They have detectors that detect human pheromones, right? One of my friends, she had been a Milab and an alien abductee, had encounters with reptilians and Draco beings, among other things. She was taken to Area 51, what she presumed to be Area 51, and was laid down on the ground somewhere on the range there. And she said the ground itself seemed to move and shift as if it was almost like a conveyor belt system, or some kind of lateral moving kind of conveyance, right? And she had things happen to her over there too. A gal named Rachel, who lived in Vegas for many years. And that was another thing too, because I'd gotten to know a number of the researchers in Vegas, and just about all of them had reptilian military experiences. And you gals may be familiar with it, but back then what they were actively investigating was this mountaintop, and they had this phrase they would use amongst each other, right? Is the mountain open today? And what they meant by that was, on the days when the mountaintop was open, you would see an installation there. You would see antenna arrays and all kinds of things. And then when the mountain was open in that fashion, they, being overly sensitive, energetically sensitive abductees and Milabs, would begin to feel all kinds of strange effects from whatever was being emitted or beamed out of that facility, right? So it drew so much interest. They actually did a write-up about it in some of the local papers there in Vegas about this alleged mountaintop where these secret military activities took place. So I'm somewhat familiar with the activity, at least back then, of Las Vegas. And one quick thought, I'd like your thoughts about this, because I've been yakking all this time, right? Jumping all over the place. But the aforementioned Rachel, who used to be in the Air Force, and Craig, the guy I had the misadventures with in Alamo, and having to rescue his car and all that stuff, she began having these very vivid visions of this, what she perceived to be this aged, kind of ostracized female reptilian being who was taking kids from the surface there in Vegas, bringing them down to her lair that kind of interconnected with the sewer systems down there, and devouring them basically. And she kept getting these visions over and over and over, and it was quite horrifying for her. So, being the kind of ballsy gal that she is, and Craig being the kind of ballsy gal he is, what they did was they went and did a journey through the sewer systems looking for this being, right? I wouldn't recommend that. Those at home watching this, I wouldn't do that. They went down there to the place approximately what she was seeing in her visions, right? But they didn't see anything. But in her visions, she said that the odor of death was horrific. That this thing is down there. That's kind of like in the wild where you have this aged tiger or whatever. It's too infirm, too old to hunt normal prey. So humans are easy pickings, and so it just develops a taste for human flesh. And they had these problems in India and other places for centuries now, where these man-eaters who go out and just wipe out all these villagers, right? Well, she got the impression something similar was happening, at least with that one reptilian, but also in I think Black Mountain, which I think is near Henderson. Correct me if I'm wrong. That is another reptilian base there. I have gone underground there looking around, right? There is a tunnel entrance there. I wouldn't be able to find it today. It's been so long. But me and another guy went down there on occasion to look around. But that is a reptilian and possibly also a military base beneath Black Mountain there. So well known amongst certain researchers. But anyhow, I've been all over the place. Over the years, in the San Diego UFO Society, they developed sources. Bill Hamilton was a good friend to the San Diego UFO Society. He developed sources living in the Antelope Valley, Aerospace Valley. That's Palmdale, Lancaster, near Area 50, Edwards Air Force Base. And he developed sources in the underground bases there. That's where Lockheed's Helendale facility is, etc., who told him about alien technology being reverse engineered, who told him about aliens working in unison with military aerospace people in the underground facilities in the Antelope Valley and Edwards Air Force Base areas. So we're not just talking about Area 51, S4, Papoose Mountain Range Complex. They're intersected, they work in sync with similar complexes around the U.S., including particularly, Palmdale, Lancaster there, because a lot of the engineers, aviation specialists from like the Skunk Works and other places, they would take these so-called Janet flights out of Palmdale, Lancaster area, fly into McCarran, right? And then from McCarran, they take these Janet flights out to the test site, whether it be Area 51 or S4, and do a lot of work there. So that's where they bring in a lot of the specialists from the aerospace industry. But anyhow, yeah, I've been yakking all this time. I'd love to hear you gals input on all this.
I'm just interested in everything he has going on. Kim was saying earlier that you're also interested in other things like Bigfoot and stuff like that. Have you ever had an experience where you've actually seen other cryptid? creatures like Bigfoot?
Yes, yeah. I've seen what I now know to be a dog man, and
Hmm.
I've seen what could have been a baby infant Sasquatch, but the the Aborigines here have a name for these small, hairy, slight of build people. They're like a they're like a race of diminutive beings. If you follow Mary Joyce's work in America, she's in North Carolina, and she's done a lot of research about the little people that the Cherokee and others have been seeing for centuries. Very similar in a way to the wee folk of the the Celtic Scandinavian folklore, right? Except not only will one encounter in North America these little wee folk that have their tartans and they look like little kind of old world kind of elfy looking guys, but they'll also come across little beings dressed like Native Americans. Okay, well, in Australia there is a race of very small in stature beings, but they've got hair all over them, right? At least one type of them, and there's no way I could remember or pronounce the name that they've come up with to describe these beings. But my wife and I were coming back from Sydney. We'd gone down there, had dinner there, and watched a movie. And then on our way back, we kind of got lost. It's just like in the movies, we get to a roundabout, right, which is what kind of their intersections around here, and instead of taking one direction, we took another, and we were kind of going back and forth. I don't think we should go this way. I think we should. Long story short, we took the wrong way. Okay, and eventually, one moment we're on a motorway, the next we were going up this very dark, no street light mountain, and with vegetation, just right along the side of the road, right, a narrow road. You can't turn around. You can only keep going, right, unless you want to try to reverse all the way back down the hill. So, and I kept getting this feeling of being watched again. Of like, oh no, I'm thinking alien abduction. What a place for it, right? So, Kylie was driving, and I was, passenger, and we're just slowly going up this hill. I'm feeling like we're being watched. I'm getting this feeling of we might get abducted out of all this. And so we're creeping along, slow speed, and then from left to right, and right in front of our car in the headlights was this little hairy being who went across us from left to right like sidestep, kind of like, almost like a vaudeville act, right? And then Kylie screams, and I scream because I saw what she was screaming about, and I screamed, "What?" Right? I didn't want her to say I just saw this little guy, sidestep his way in front of our car. Right? That's what I saw. So anyway, this thing goes from left to right and disappears in the bush. We go over the mountain, come back down, and thankfully we run into the motorway again. All right, little detour. So anyway, a few days later, I go, "You remember when we got stuck up in that mountain a few nights ago, and then when you screamed, right?" I'll tell you what I saw. I saw this little furry guy going from left to right, with his arms outstretched, almost like he was mocking us. And she goes, "That's exactly what I saw, right?" That's why she screamed. That's why I screamed, "What?" Because I didn't really want to hear what her correct answer was at that time, right? And then on another occasion, this is back when I was in Bullhead City, Arizona, right across the Colorado River from Laughlin, Nevada, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I was working at the Bullhead City Medical Center there. It's like the tri-states kind of, for that region, hospital, right? I was working in a non-clinical admin in the records department. And it services people from Needles, California, from Nevada, from Arizona. It's right there, kind of like in the middle. And anyway, you know how it is living in Nevada. When the time change comes, which screws me up big time, right? Like, Arizona never changes their time. They never do daylight savings, right? So when the time change occurs, say that, because at the time, no, I wasn't working at the hospital then. I was working at the casinos earlier. I was working at what used to be the they changed the name of it to the Aquarius. But before that, it was an iconic named hotel casino. I forget the name of it, but they changed the name to the Aquarius, and I was working there at the time. And I started at like 7 a.m. or something. Front desk, hotel register, crappy work, right? Standing on your feet all day with all these unruly, guests, and they always overbooked the place, always, right? And then they would make things worse when they'd have these big slot conventions or, Hold'em conventions. So the point being is that, okay, if it's 5 a.m. in Arizona, it's 6 a.m. in Nevada, right? So if I'm starting at 7 a.m. in Nevada, right across the bridge, well, that's 6 a.m. for me. So I would lose an hour in the morning and regain it in the evening. So long story short, I finish my shift at the casino, and I drive back into Bullhead City, and you drive across the bridge, whammo, it's an hour later, right? And I'm tired. It's like my day is extra long because of the time shift thing. And then I'm on Bullhead Parkway, and I'm just about to get to the turn to go up the hill to where I live, right? And then I'm driving kind of slowly, and on the right hand side, no, back then I drove on the left hand side, like all Americans do. So I'm here on the left side of the car, and I'm driving along slowly, and I'm looking at this thing on all fours, and it's very large. I mean, its shoulders were, and I'm sitting down in the car, its shoulders were like almost to the roof of the car, if not higher, right? And in my mind, screaming cryptid, what the hell is this, right? And it's kind of like loping towards me. And I talked to Jody Cook, who I had him on the show. He's the director of the North American Dogman Project, and I explained to him what this being looked like, and he just absolutely 100%. It was a dogman, and it was on all fours, right? Because they can stand up and they can walk, but it was on all fours, very kind of hunched front shoulders, very large head, and the head was lighter in color, and it had a mane that was kind of lighter in color, and this thing just walked by me, and I'm looking at this thing, right? And again, because of the time change, I'm dog tired, no pun intended. Normally, investigator mode would kick in. I'm going to investigate, it was probably a good thing I was dog tired from the shift. Okay, if I have to get ready, I have to start getting ready at 5 a.m. because it's 6 a.m. over there, and I start at 7 a.m. over there, right? So everything is just kind of sped up, and then you reverse the process coming back. So I come back, it's automatically an hour later back in Arizona. I just want to go home. So I think that saved me a lot of grief, because normally I would have turned that car right around, maybe even stupidly got out of the car. And since then, I've listened and studied a lot of dogman reports. Sometimes these things go from all fours till they stand up. And then when they stand up, all these bones and stuff start popping and crack, 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 crack. And suddenly it's 8-9 feet tall, and I would have freaked out, basically. So actually, it was a good thing that we were going through the time change, because I was so tired. But I'm telling you, that thing was right next to my car. I watched it kind of lope along behind me. I'm looking at it in the side view and the rear view as I'm slowly driving away. My mind screaming cryptid, because I had not heard of the term dogmen by then. I only found out about the Beast of Bray Road, sometime later, in the whole dogman thing. I knew at a deep level that things like werewolves and what have you existed at some level, but so that was when I saw that. And also, people have to understand that there's for some of these cryptids, including dogmen and Sasquatch type beings, some of them have a multi-dimensional, interdimensional capability where they can come into your dreams. They can do mind speak. They can manifest things in your presence. I've had Mike Patterson on my show, and he's developed a, a friendship with a tribe of Sasquatch in the wilds of Ontario, where they've done a lot of vocalizations for him. They've done a lot of metaphysical, mystical things right in his presence. He's seen them do all this stuff. So I've had a Sasquatch, and going back to 73, 74, 75 time frame, at a time in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which I was not aware of till much later, when there was a lot of joint UFO hovering, low altitude or landed UFOs with a Bigfoot type creature in close proximity, either getting out of the craft itself or being or getting on board the craft or being in the close proximity to a craft. All that was going on. 73, 74, 75 time frame. Stan Gordon wrote a great series of books about it because he was there at the time doing all this on the ground research. Well, during that time frame, I had a dream when a gleaming silver saucer, and that's another facet to the alien abduction contactee aspect syndrome thing, is it's multifaceted. We are multidimensional infinite beings, so our experiences are not simply relegated to physical kind of, it runs the gamut of dreams, of astral abductions, astral experiences, alternate reality stuff. I mean, all kinds of things go on. And so I had this dream where a silver saucer landed in the very busy avenue in front of the house in San Jose where I lived at the time. A ramp formed, and then these three big Sasquatch creatures started walking down the ramp straight towards my house. And in this dream, my younger brother, my next younger brother, was with me, and he's figured prominently in a lot of my UFO related dreams because I know he's had experiences too. And in this dream, it was only me and my younger brother in the house. And then I'm looking out the front windows, and here come these three Sasquatch type creatures coming down this ramp headed straight for us. So the first thing that comes to my mind is the side gate. I've got to make sure, as if it'll keep them out, right? The side gate, I've got to make sure it's locked, right? So in the dream, I run out, the sliding glass door out the back, go around to the side to make sure that it's locked, and then I can feel the presence of one of the Sasquatch right behind the fence, and then it makes this sound like just rip the heavens asunder. It just reverberated in my mind and in my chest, and it sounded just like this, except super loud. Oh, yo, 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 yo. Terrified me. And then and that's how the dream ended. I was right there by the sliding, bolt, by the I'm in the backyard, it's in the front yard, it's the side of the house, and it makes this horrible oh yo 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 sound. It's shaking the heavens, and I guess I blacked out on the dream or something, But
Yeah.
that happened at the same time frame as all this stuff was going on in Ohio and particularly in Pennsylvania. And I've got Stan Gordon's book. And 75 was a big year too, because the northern, I don't know how long you guys want to go with this, because I could talk about this for a while. But
Keep going.
the Northern Strategic Air Command tier of bases, Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana, all the way to the East Coast, Loring Air Force Base. Oh, I'm still on the show? Anyway, just in case you gals can still hear me, all those bases were visited by alien craft. Oh,
We're
here's
here.
Kim and Jack.
Sorry.
It's okay. Were you still able to hear me?
No, go back for a minute, but what we're fascinated about right now, and sorry, it glitched out and I had to jump back in. Jax was saying that
I'm actually familiar with that noise that you said. It's actually like Bigfoot talking. They make this noise to each other, and
Could you
I've heard
talk
this
about
before.
that?
Do what?
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I actually grew up with family members, and I started looking out for Bigfoot when I was very young, probably about 4 years old. So I grew up learning about the language, the talking, the noises, all the different things that they do. And I've heard like exactly what you were talking about earlier about how some people have recordings of them actually communicating with each other, but they actually do that exact noise, and that's how they communicate with each other, with that yo 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 yo. And it's very fascinating that you would actually say that exact thing, because I've personally heard that myself.
Wow, wow. You're the only
Yeah,
other person I know that I don't tell the story often because it's kind of embarrassing. Oh, yo, 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 but
but
oh,
that's
it
exactly what they
terrified me.
do.
Well,
Wow.
I kind of had a quick question. Is you were saying how, okay, so you and Kylie were kind of drawn to some other road, and then you kind of felt like you were being watched, and all of a sudden there it was. So, number one, is are these things communicating with us telepathically and drawing us in? And uh, you
Well,
had
he definitely has a connection, that's for sure.
she had said
Yeah,
something
yes.
about your dreams and interdimensional. Are they drawing us into another dimensional?
Yes, because just to interject for a second, both from a Sasquatch and a Dogman perspective, because I don't tell the story to many people, but I've had
Mm-hmm.
Dogmen come into my dreams. I've had Chad Stumke, who's an outstanding researcher from the uh, the wilds of Upper Michigan, right? And he's had all kinds of, he does great research and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I was telling him my Dogman story in the members section, and basically the long and the short of it was, I had an encounter with a type of Dogman, and this type of Dogman, he looks like, if you're familiar with what chow dogs look like, with the kind of frilly kind of mane kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
it looked like that. And that's been described by some people before, right? So in this dream, I'm in the kitchen, and not my kitchen, but a kitchen somewhere. And there is an alleyway, outside of the kitchen. And I'm looking out the window, and I'm seeing, like, crossing from left to right and right to left, this big Dogman guy that looked like a big upright bipedal chow kind of Dogman, right? And you remember the the glyphs and the iconography of ancient Egypt, where they show the Neters, the gods, and they're always holding these oversized ankhs and these oversized, these rods and other things, which I've always likened them to power tools. I mean, the knowledge has been corrupted and intentionally obscured down through the ages, but I get a strong feeling that those weren't just ornamental things. I think that those were actual power tools of some kind, right? Some kind of, energetic things, right? So anyway, in this it wasn't a dream, it was a real interdimensional type astral experience. This Dogman was holding what looked to be some big key in his hand. And then, the way my mind was working is like, oh my goodness, there's a big chow type Dogman outside the window here, right? And I'm here by myself in this strange house I'd never been in.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went from like bad to worse, because whereas before, at least a moment before, there was at least like a wall and a window separating me from the Dogman. Now, either all that became translucent or it just disappeared, because now it's like there's the Dogman, there's nothing in between the Dogman and me, and we're just standing in front of each other, right? Now, if I had not gotten so frightened, right, I would have said, okay, he's got a key, that's a metaphor for something, what's he trying to tell me? Now, all this stuff after the fact, I wish I'd been more lucid and not so frightened, right? I'm not ashamed to say that I was kind of scared, right? So it was giving me a message of some kind by holding this oversized, what appeared to be a key, and was standing before me, but I wasn't really lucid. I was kind of in the fear mode, so I wasn't able to ask any appropriate questions. Since then, I've kind of put it out there. Okay, whatever you had in mind, kind of let me know, but kind of in a non-frightening way, if you don't mind. So that's how that experience ended. And then what happened also with the Sasquatch and their ability to uh, interact with us interdimensionally. I kept getting moved to read this book about Leonard Peltier. This it's not even accurate to call him like a Lakota Sioux activist. He's just a guy who likes freedom and just wants to be left alone, right? So he was set up in an ambush by the feds where a federal officer, I think, was killed, and then they threw Leonard Peltier into a federal pen, I guess, for life. As far as I know, if he's still alive, he's in there, right? Still, poor guy. Talk about persecution, right? So I kept getting moved to read this book about Leonard Peltier, but I couldn't bring myself to read about a Lakota guy who was railroaded by the feds, wound up in a federal slammer. It just, my heart goes out to him, but I just couldn't bring myself to read about that, right? But the movement, the feeling was so strong. Finally, I relented. I almost said out loud, okay, I'll read the book, right? So I started reading it, and in the first chapter, the author of the book talks about, and completely surprised me, the author talked about how he'd been going to all these different reservations, talking to these Native American elders, and they kept bringing up the story of the big hairy man, right? And how in their culture, when the big hairy man keeps making these appearances, he's trying to tell you a story. He's trying to convey a message or a warning. And the way the Native American elders perceived the visits of the big hairy man, and this is all coming out in the first chapter of the Leonard Peltier book, right? Was that the hairy men were warning humanity about, you know what, things are coming down the pike. Change your ways now, or it'll be too late, basically, because there's going to be things happening in this planet. Earth changes, nothing to do with the nonsense climate change, but real Earth changes like we're experiencing now. And so I'm reading all this wide-eyed. It's like I've been ignoring this book for weeks now, right? Because I didn't want to read about the victimization of this poor Sioux guy, right? So anyway, that night, I'm sleeping, and I felt the presence, the very strong presence of Sasquatch in my bedroom. It was like, you finally read the book. You know what I mean? And it was like,
Wow.
so I mean, it doesn't sound like much to, Mike Patterson refers to those mentally rigid Sasquatch researchers who insist on saying, oh, it's just like this unknown simian, unknown ape, right? That doesn't have all these advanced, metaphysical abilities, what have you. He calls them apers. Mike Patterson does, because he says these idiots just think they're just a bunch of apes, roaming around, when he knows that they have a society. He knows that they've been around, all along. He knows that some of them interact with ETs. He knows that some of them, we have eyewitness accounts right here, where, well-known cryptozoologist Rex Gilroy, he was at a sacred site here, and a portal opened up right in front of him. What they call a yowie over here stepped out. They looked at each other for a moment. Then the yowie turns around and goes back to the portal. It closes up, and there's just nothing but space there, right? And he's standing there. So these beings do have, some of them, I'm not saying all Sasquatch have this metaphysical capability, but at least some of them do, right? And so one cannot look at the Sasquatch phenomena without looking at its interdimensional metaphysical aspects, as well its connection to extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, etc. Because these beings, some of them have the means to open portals. They seem to use the worldwide portal grid that allows them to go from one place to another. And then some of them, as seen in the cases in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then my dream around the same time frame, they seem to have an intimate connection, at least some of them, with aliens. And the great Puerto Rican investigator Jorge Martin Miranda, he talks about a case where an eyewitness in Puerto Rico was hiding in the bush, and when he saw these two beings that would be commonly referred to as Palladian looking or Nordic in appearance, long blonde hair, humanoid, Aryan in appearance, Nordic looking, and they had this Sasquatch being with them, but the Sasquatch appeared to be under their control. It seemed to be under like total mind control under these Palladians, right? And we've heard similar things. Mike Patterson has developed sources who told him that he heard from hunters and other people that the military have actively been searching for these Sasquatch and dogmen. And if you listen to some of the reports and the witness testimony from about the dogmen, there are teams, black ops teams that go around. They have this kind of parabolic looking antenna, portable setup where they, I mean, if a dog happens to be around, it'll induce a seizure, right? But they apparently use these to ward off or subdue these cryptids. And whenever someone has an encounter with one of these beings, first of all, the park rangers will say it was just a bear, whether it was a Sasquatch or something else, and then try to convince the witness that it was a bear. And then sometimes if the experiences and encounters continue, then these black ops types show up, because Jody Cook talked about, as researchers, and I'm sure you gals have experienced the same thing, there are times when, by dint of circumstances, destiny, call it what you will, you're at the right place at the right time for an ongoing series of experiences where you're there, you're experiencing it, it's real, all kinds of stuff is going on. And for Jody Cook and his team, that was in Germantown, Ohio, where there were just like all kinds of dogmen stuff going on. And these black ops teams would be over there, actively surveilling independent researchers, going into the woods, and they cordoned off parts of the wilds there with the help of the Department of Natural Resources, whatever they're called, to keep people away from these areas where there's a lot of dogman activity. So these dogmen, they're real. I think there's some of them seem to be, I don't want to call them packs, but they seem to be part of their own society, right? That must be factored into all this, because I think the veils between worlds are thinning. A lot of these cryptids, according to the Aborigines and the Native American elders, some of these cryptids have the means to go from one dimension to another. That's why sometimes when people report these cryptids, they seem to have these metaphysical properties where they could be a big hairy Sasquatch, but it doesn't leave any footprints in the snow, for example, or the footprints abruptly disappear, or other things, even associated with some of these large cat panther sightings, that some of them have seemingly metaphysical abilities. So it just shows that there's a lot more to this physical world than the mainstream would have us believe, and that these cryptids, one cannot separate them, in my view, from the wider UFO ET phenomenon, because it's all the same planet. How could we separate the two? It's all the same place, right? So, and I think the message also for us is we are essentially multidimensional beings, and if we can get back to our roots of being heart-centered, embodied, right, and really work hard to be, righteous, good people, that eventually over time we can start to reacquire these metaphysical abilities. So I do believe there's a frequency fence they've set up, because a lot of the Milabs that I talk to, they're having difficulties remembering their dreams. They know they're still being accessed, utilized in operations, but they're having a difficult time recalling the experiences, or they will have glimpses of fragments of memories when they wake up, but it's quickly wiped away. So they know they're still being utilized, but their memories are being wiped. And it may have something to do with a lot of the weather modification, frequency modulation that's going on. Maybe an unintended or ancillary aspect of that, besides weather manipulation, is it affects the memory dream recall of these people, which to me, I look at things in opposites. I go, well, that's bad, and unfortunately they're doing that, but at the same time it tells me that if they're going to go to that much trouble, to that extent, they really are afraid of the innate abilities that many of us have. So I think that's a good thing, that we can work towards this goal of reacquiring our innate natural metaphysical abilities.
James, they keep talking about disclosure, and is there like competition about what theories that they're trying to move forward to the general public, or are stuff still hidden? It's like, don't tell them this, tell them that. How much of it's made up? how much of it, what are we
Is
to
really
believe
true.
when it starts coming out, more disclosure?
That's a very good question. There seems to have been, it's been suggested by many, old time researchers that there has been this concerted effort to gradually release certain types of information to the research community as a form of limited hangout, because the ridicule for so long held sway that it was a limited hangout because this information would only get out amongst the UFO research community. And even as fractious and divided as the research community still remains, and like it was back in the old days, even more so, right? That was before the internet age. They were always squabbling, and there was just so many competing factions, and there was a lot of black ops intelligence skullduggery at work precisely to create all this acrimony and infighting. And so when these documents began to be released, the so-called majestic documents and other documents released presumably from people on the inside, there was heated debate as to the authenticity. Oh, is this disinformation? Is this real? But I would say that if one were to go to the website of the father and son team, the Woods, right? Ryan, and I can't remember who the father is and who the son is, but they've got a website called, so what is it called? majesticdocuments.com, something like that. And they wrote a book about it. And I've gone there and I've studied the documents, I've studied the names of these well-known and not so well-known military scientific people that are listed and mentioned in these documents. And I can't help but feel that a lot of the leakages from the inside, going back decades now, a lot of them were real, and they were from people, for whatever reason. Maybe they were motivated by altruistic reasons. The people need to know about this. We can't tell them everything all in one go because people will panic if they knew what we know, right? So we'll spoon feed this to them by allowing some of this information to get into the research community and let them sort it out, let them fight it out, as it were, right? But when I look at some of the names mentioned in these documents, General Nathan Twining, General Hoyt Vandenberg, Admiral Roscoe Hillencotter, and also the scientists that are mentioned, Dr. John von Neumann, what have you, there's definitely a clear pattern begins to emerge over time. And that I also often talk about, to me, one of the key smoking guns about all this is the letter written by Dr. Robert Sarbacher. Dr. Robert Sarbacher was the dean of the Washington Institute of Technology, and he wrote a seminal work on the use of high frequencies in radio engineering. In the 1950s, he was an unpaid consultant for the Pentagon with a very high-level security clearance. And the reason we know about Dr. Robert Sarbacher was because of the diligent efforts of the late William Steinman, who was a co-author to the book UFO Crash at Aztec. And Steinman was a man after my own heart. Bill Hamilton actually knew this guy. He was an indefatigable, just a tenacious researcher, wouldn't take no for an answer. When he found out that Wilbert Smith, who headed up the Canadian UFO program, Project Magnet, had passed away, he rocks up to the house of the widow of Wilbert Smith and asks to see his papers, right? She lets him. Okay, now he had previously known that prior to that time, Wilbert Smith had written an official document under the Department of Transportation in Canada about the possible use of electromagnetism as a form of propulsion for some of the alien craft, and the fact that they could also perhaps try to duplicate or replicate the means by which one could use magnetics for purposes of propulsion, right? So he was already aware of that memo that Dr. Wilbert, I don't know if he's a doctor, but at any rate, he was an engineer, Wilbert Smith, wrote for the Canadian government. So he went looking through the archives, the papers of Wilbert Smith, and he came across a document where Wilbert Smith mentions the name of a scientist who briefed him, because one of the documents that Wilbert Smith wrote to the Canadian government was the fact that, you know, through channels, through the embassy staff in Washington D.C., Canadian embassy staff, arrangements were made for him to talk to a very high level American scientist, and this American scientist told him, one, UFOs exist; two, the subject is the most highly classified in the U.S. government at that time. This is like 1950, and that a small group under Dr. Vannevar Bush was heading up the research efforts to find out more about alien technology, and that the UFO program in America was so classified it was rated 2 points higher than the hydrogen bomb. Okay, so when William Steinman was going through all these personal papers of the deceased Wilbert Smith, he came across a document which Smith identifies the unnamed source, that unnamed American scientist that he referenced in the document to the Canadian government. And that American scientist was none other than Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who had his own missile development company. He was an unpaid consultant to the Pentagon and was cleared to see reports and documentation about the recovery of crashed alien spacecraft and alien bodies, right? So as soon as William Steinman saw that, oh, I got a name now, Dr. Robert Sarbacher, he starts writing Sarbacher all these letters, right? Eventually Sarbacher writes him back and says, sorry for not getting back sooner, been busy, yada yada yada. Okay, here is what I can tell you. He said, I saw this information in my office in the Pentagon, and here's what I can tell you with absolute certainty. Alluding to the list of names that Steinman provided him, because Steinman was following up on the UFO crash at Aztec, which debunkers had tried so hard over the years to relegate to the dustbin of hoaxes and disinformation, etc., etc. Now, thanks to the efforts of certain researchers, we now know that Aztec absolutely happened. March 1948, a saucer was recovered, and along with a number of alien gray bodies, right? And there was a list of names that Steinman had provided to Sarbacher and wanted confirmation if these guys were involved in the crash at retrieval at Aztec, New Mexico. And in response, Dr. Sarbacher said, all I can tell you is this. Dr. John von Neumann was definitely involved. And who was Dr. John von Neumann? He was a computer scientist. He was a consultant to the Manhattan Project, alleged to have been involved in the Philadelphia experiment, which wouldn't surprise me, right? He also mentioned Dr. Vannevar Bush was involved, absolutely involved. And that would confirm a lot of things, because Dr. Vannevar Bush's expertise lay in putting together these highly classified type research and development programs. The Manhattan Project is an example, also all the programs in World War II. He created the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Dr. Vannevar Bush did, right? An offshoot of that was the Manhattan Project. So he was an ideal person to use to put together a secret back engineering program of recovered alien artifacts. He also stated that Dr. Robert Oppenheimer was most likely involved, and he was also, Oppenheimer's name has come up prominently in some of these leaked documents. He apparently was at the main crash site at Roswell, right? So you know, that's just an example of, and he also mentioned that Dr. Werner von Braun may have been involved also, because there was a contingent of paperclip scientists and engineers out of Fort Bliss, Texas, and also working at White Sands, New Mexico, and they had been consulted about the recovery of these alien craft at Roswell and other crashes, and they categorically stated, no, we didn't work on anything like this when we were in the Soviet Union, or as far as we know, these are not Soviet in origin, there's something else, right? So the point of relevance is that there is documentation. Another one is the Twining memo, most likely written by his chief of intelligence, General Nathan Twining, chief of intelligence at the time of Roswell. He was the general in command of the Air Material Command at what later became Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is a key focal point for all this stuff. And in that memo that was sent out under the CHOP, i.e. the signature of General Nathan Twining, flying saucers are real. Nothing, they're not fictitious or visionary. That they've been seen to fly singly or in formation, and he went on to list all these characteristics of them, and even mentioned some of the characteristics of some of the material, right, without explaining how the material, was analyzed or how they came to that determination of what the material was like, right? So that's another one of these smoking guns. So the point of relevance is there has been a concerted effort, and I'm guessing that there were insiders with altruistic motives. They really sincerely felt that over time, gradually, incrementally, people should know about this, and they didn't want to do it in an abrupt fashion because of all the societal chaos it may create, but rather in a spoon-fed fashion. And as far as disclosure, will they ever get to the bottom line? No, because the bottom line is these reptilians have created reptilian human hybrids that they set up as plantation managers for this planet. That the ruling elite of this planet, increasingly you see them on TV all the time screaming about certain medical treatments, right? They may look outwardly like humans, but anatomically there's clear differences. I can see they have hybrid reptilian features. All one has to do is go look at a rogues gallery of known serial killers and cannibals throughout history, photos of them, and then you'll get a very idea of what these hybrids look like. And the fact that these serial killer hybrids look a lot like these psychopaths that are, in the medical field, the psychopaths in politics, psychopaths in the military, because they're all part of the same reptilian Draco hybrid bloodline. And the model they chose to subjugate this planet on this occasion, there's no telling, in our distant past about invasions, counter-invasions of aliens, all that stuff, right? Which has happened many times throughout the cosmos. But on this occasion, what they decided to do is create the subspecies of humans, sheepanoids I call them, out of disgust. People that just don't have higher. Barbara Bartlett used to always tell me, these people, referring to the masses of humanity, they just don't have the neurology, the neurocircuitry to understand any of this, right? And what she meant by that is they've been deliberately de-evolved genetically, neurologically, so they're incapable of critical analysis. They're incapable of thinking for themselves. Indeed, they are predisposed to allowing, if you will, these aliens to work through them, to promote all these intrusive thoughts, OCD thought loops, etc., reinforced by the mass media, reinforced by academia, etc. So they literally can't think for themselves. In fact, they become a force multiplier for this control system, is what happens with them. So they've created this subspecies of sheepanoids, but there are some people like us, and I don't say this in an elitist fashion, please don't misunderstand me, but there are some people like us who are just, we are just incapable of that level of mindlessness and mental rigidity. That we still have this connection to source, and we still have a functioning intuitive process. So as far as full disclosure, oh, you mean like the huge processing plants underground where humans are harvested and consumed, and the parts are
keep talking. We're getting to the nitty gritty. Let's talk about it.
That's what they found in some of the early saucer crashes, right? And this has come out in some of the released documents, released only to the research community. Make of it what you will. Was they found human body parts in some of these crash saucers, right? And in the very controversial Project Grudge 13 report, right? Initial programs were Project Sign, Project Grudge, Blue Book, but they were only the outer facade of the real nitty-gritty that I alluded to earlier, the work of actual back engineering of alien technology with the likes of Vannevar Bush and John von Neumann, etc., and also a coterie of high-level generals and admirals, world famous for those of us who study military history. General James Doolittle, who was also a Shell Corporation executive, his specialty was aviation and developing, special fuels and high octane fuels for aviation. General Hoyt Vandenberg and a number of others, right? Dr. General Robert Montague, he was the commander of Sandia Base, part of the Sandia, Los Alamos, Kirtland Air Force Base complex, where Sandia Base is where a lot of the nuclear weapons are kept, right? Which is why there's been so many UFO sightings and what have you there. They went to the trouble of utterly discrediting and destroying the life of one of the great UFO researchers of the past, who was delving into all that stuff in Sandia. But anyway, getting back to the nitty gritty, right? Humans are not at the top of the food chain. Have never been at the top of the food chain, because there are some beings, not just the reptilians, but a lot of their cosmic vassals and allies, like some of the Greys, for example. I know people personally who've been in these processing plants. A number of people who've seen human cadavers and body parts coming down conveyor belts. This is what Dr. Carla Turner and Barbara Bartlett talked about 30, 40 years ago by now. Right? Some of the very well-known names, I won't mention them, they're well-known in the research community, have told me personally they've been in these places and they've seen the body parts coming out of conveyor belts, and they've seen the body parts in vats. And some of the people I've had on my show, David Eckhart and the gal that goes by the pseudonym of Sashida, okay, they've been down there. They've seen the humans and the children held in captivity. They've seen the processing going on. So there are places where a lot of this stuff is going on. Yelm, Washington, for example, Washington State, there's a big reptilian operation going on underground there. There's a big alien operation going on beneath Yakima, Washington. The National Security Agency actually for decades now has had a facility there monitoring the alien activity, right? So what we're seeing on the surface is the manifestations we're seeing on the surface, the normalization of all kinds of horrific things which are anything but normal. Even the normalization of cannibalism. Oh, with these stem cells we can grow human meat. You can eat them, but you're not a cannibal, right? Just call us Soylent Green or something, but you're not a cannibal, so you get a free pass, right? So they're openly talking about all this spirit cooking and all that stuff, making it chic and trendy. Oh, if you want to be a Hollywood A-lister, this is what we do, right? This evil, wicked, cannibalistic sewer scum stuff. But that's what they're like. That's what that hybrid. There's a book that I've got, very hard to find. I thought I'd lost it. Right? It's called fire alarm went on. That's in my end. It'll go out in a moment, but it's called Sex, Crimes, and History, and it just goes into detail about principally what these royals, these counts and countesses, and what these royal dignitary types, what they get up to, going back to medieval times and going ancient times, right? Nero and Caligula and all them. It's the same hybridized. That's why they're all evil sewer scum. And what they've done is they've normalized. They've brought out this Babylon evil stuff, repackaged it Hollywood style, presented it, right, as the new norm. And that's why what passes for a medical system is nothing but a chamber of horrors. It's what we've known all along about the Rockefeller inspired medical system.
That's right.
What's going on now is everything that's been going on, well, not everything, but a lot of the things that have been going on underground is starting to manifest on the surface, right? And another thing that needs to be understood is in some of these underground facilities where there are military working in unison with aliens, including reptilians, I would argue that at least in some of these facilities, the humans are not the top dogs down there. They're getting their marching orders. Because in some of these facilities, the eyewitnesses I've spoken to have said, yes, there's military personnel there, in the same places where humans are being held captive, the same places where humans are being, dissected and consumed and what have you. So they are cognizant. Deep black elements of the military aerospace community are absolutely cognizant of what's going on in some of these underground facilities. And There's also the story of Dulce, Section D is what it was known as. And I've driven by Dulce on a research trip before. Didn't have time to go there, but me and Craig Bowers, the aforementioned Craig Bowers, were headed down to Colorado to talk to Niara Isley, another well-known Milab who's had reptilian military experiences. We hung out with her for a while. But anyway, you're probably familiar with the story of Thomas Costello, but it bears repeating, okay? Because I know people, you know how it is in ufological circles. You make friends, you lose friends, and all that stuff, right? So, like Bill Hamilton, for example, he apparently knew Thomas Costello, or was one person removed from knowing Thomas Costello. I knew another guy, Jason Bishop III, who later became known as, he used a pseudonym. That was a pseudonym, and his real name was Tal, right? And I don't know if Tal is still on this side of the veil. He could have passed away by now, for all I know. But he was one of the original inner Earth researchers who did a lot of work as far as underground cavern systems. If you readers are familiar with the old Shaver mysteries, that whole lore of which goes back to antiquity, of civilizations living underground, quite advanced civilizations, right? The Coming Race, written by Edward Bulwer Lytton, is a classic example of one of the first known pieces of literature where they're talking about these underground advanced civilizations, which one day will come to the surface and take over, which basically is what is happening. Edward Bulwer Lytton was an insider. He was probably an adept into all kinds of like Rosicrucian, Golden Dawn kind of stuff, right? And he wrote that book about this race called the Vril, the Vrilia, the V, right? Anyway, the Dulce story is key because if memory serves, Tal Levesque actually knew Thomas Costello, Thomas C. Thomas Costello was a security specialist for RAND Corporation. RAND Corporation was originally created by General Henry Arnold, known as Hap Arnold, and then also a key player in the creation of RAND was General Curtis LeMay, who was also deeply involved in a lot of this alien UFO stuff. And RAND stands for Research and Development, working initially for the Air Force, and then it branched out and became its own mega entity. And Thomas Costello was a security specialist who worked for RAND, right? And he underwent a strenuous background vetting process where they actually, and they do this to intelligence operatives who are going to be trained and set off into the wild, right? They dosed Thomas with LSD because they told him that enemies may get a hold of him, dose him, and he needs to know what it feels like in case he's ever drugged, and they attempt to debrief him when he's in LSD state, right? So eventually he got his clearance and he went to what was known as Section D, i.e. Dulce. And Dulce is set up like it's a very large cylindrical shaft that goes deep underground, and each floor has a circular corridor set up with annexes and offices going off, and it's like spokes of a wheel. Think of it that way, right? And it was a joint reptilian alien gray facility, and the Department of Energy was working there. Now, the Department of Energy is what used to be known as the Atomic Energy Commission. The Atomic Energy Commission was a civilian organization which in theory took over for the Manhattan Project after World War II, which started out as an Army engineering project, right, under the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers under General Leslie Groves, who also figured prominently in some of these so-called Majestic papers. He was briefed into this because of the stuff that was happening at Sandia, the fact that even back then they knew that aliens had an extreme interest in nuclear weapons, what they called atomic weapons back then. So the Department of Energy, in theory, ran Section D, but really it was run by these aliens. And Thomas Costello's job, and I'm telling this story, it's well known in our field, and I'm sure you gals have heard of it, but for those who are not quite really familiar with the story, it needs to be said, because these stories, these lurid stories of underground bases, of processing plants, these stories literally go back to antiquity. And Thomas Costello worked in Dulce, Section D, in the 1970s. Right? Um, and as a security officer, he had all these monitors set up, all these cameras set up, and the way Bill Hamilton explained it, it was like, he'd just be looking at a security monitor, and here come a couple of security guards.
Mm-hmm.
A little while later, here comes a scientist. A little while later, here comes a 2-star general,
Mm.
accompanied by an alien. Okay, so Thomas C. became aware of this disaffection amongst other members of the staff there, that they felt that word had to be gotten out to the surface world of what was going on there, because one of the floors was known as Nightmare Hall, where all this genetic experimentation was going on, with creating all these chimeras, creating all these beings that should never have existed in the first place, right? Mixing and matching all this DNA. And we've heard similar stories beneath Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. China Lake is another place where we've heard these kinds of stories before. China Lake Naval Weapons Center. Big part of this, actually. And so Thomas C. resolved to escape and bring documentation in the form of videos, still photography, documentation with him, right? Because he was on a floor where all these human prisoners were kept. He was told not to talk to any of these prisoners because they were all insane, and don't believe a word of what they said, right? Because they were all clinically insane and doing experiments with them to try to help them, right? But he went down there to this floor and began talking to some of these prisoners, and then all these life stories would come out. I had a business. I was a real estate agent. I had my own company up on the surface, and then next thing you know, I'm down here. So he began getting these stories out of these people. They weren't crazy. They weren't insane. They were just normal people who'd been kidnapped from the surface and brought down to be utilized in these ongoing genetic experiments. So for him, that was the last straw, because there was like a whole floor full of these people.
Mm.
And we've heard this story, like, described by many others in different parts of the world. This underground complex system, and a lot of them are connected by maglevs, magnetically levitated trains, get me from here to there in no time flat, right? They're all connected, well, not all of them, but many of them connected by these maglevs. So this is happening all over the place, underground. So that was the last straw for Thomas Costello. He decided to escape and bring a lot of this documentation with him. He did. They knew he was gone. They immediately kidnapped his wife and his son,
God.
and he presumed they took them underground to be used in these medical experiments. And Thomas C. was on the run ever since, right?
Wow.
Now, what Bill Hamilton said was every year they'd set up this system where Thomas C. would leave a coded message to let them know he was still alive, still on the run. And it's been some time now, been decades now, and Bill Hamilton said, well, we haven't heard from him. We can only presume that they found him, right? But apparently he'd buried this chest. Talk about a treasure chest. He's buried this chest with VHS tapes that he
Oh, wow.
absconded with. Yes, because again, he was the security specialist who had monitors for all the floors, all the corridors, all the labs, etc., right? So he made off with a representative sampling of all that stuff, and had been on the run. Apparently Tal Levesque knew this guy personally, so he's a real person. He was a real person. So when people hear these stories, and also you have to look at it from a historical standpoint, because the Department of Energy, he mentions the department, he worked for the Department of Energy. Well, actually he worked for RAND, which had the security contract for the Department of Energy facility, which is actually run by aliens and reptilians, right? And then there was a story that came out. Now, I knew the person, Joyce Spivey. Like so many researchers, she died an untimely death. And Evie Lorgan and I, and Craig Bowers and I, had been to her house many times. We used to have Milab meetings in the high desert. This is the Victorville area, what we used to call the hot zone, because of all the there's an underground facility in the Victorville, Apple Valley area that some of us have been taken to against our will, right? And a lot of us had undergone, training and what have you, at the hands of that military group, beneath this mountain. Now, what they did in that mountaintop was they couldn't force the homesteaders to leave, right? No matter what kind of blandishments or inducements or whatever the case may be. So they resorted to the simple expedient of burning them out. They created a huge forest fire that burned out all these houses. And then, and I knew people there who, shortly after, you know, the flames and embers died away, they went up there, and then suddenly the mountaintop had a, you know, barbed wire top fence all around the perimeter of the summit, and it was guarded by military troops with steel helmets and flak jackets, right? The nearest fire department never showed up. The first fire department that showed up was from Fort Irwin Army Base, 60 miles away, right? They're the first ones to show up. The locals were kept out. That's how they got. I've got pictures of the aftermath of the forest fire and stuff. So they literally burned these people out because they, you know, the operations going on down there, up there, and within the mountain. But within that mountain is there a military complex, and there's also a reptilian base beneath that mountain. Because my friend, who I've also had on this show, my show, Lorena Smith, she's gone public. She's been on Monsters and Mysteries in America, right? The reptilians were coming out of closets in her bedroom, and they're opening up portals in her living room and stepping out, right? Then the military started showing up and all this other, and me and Craig Bowers spend many nights doing reptilian stakeouts in those bedrooms, and sometimes they've come out, right? So the point of relevance is the reptilian base there in Apple Valley, Victorville area. A lot of us had been taken there, and we started going up to Joyce Spivey's house. She'd already had a long-standing Milab abductee group in Victorville. So Evie Lorgan, Craig Bowers, and I began going there. That's where we met Lorena Smith and some others, Donna Hendershot, who since passed away. And, you know, we would share all these Milab reptilian stories, right? So one of the stories that came out also was I met another guy. He was a former U.S. Marine stationed at Camp Pendleton, Oceanside, California. And his dad told him upon enlisting, never volunteer for anything, okay? Because his dad apparently was in the military before that. Never volunteer, period. Well, what happened was this guy, and I think what happens is, based on the genetic profile, blood type, other factors, right? The military seems to know who within their ranks has had alien abduction experiences. This comes up again and again and again and again, and which has led others, and I think there's an element of distraction, disinformation to this too, where it's led others to come to the erroneous conclusion that, oh, all these experiences is military mind control, there's no aliens, nothing like that. And this delves into the whole, you know, Project Blue Beam thing, that there's going to be this big fake alien invasion. I always say, if there's a fake alien invasion, it's because the reptilians want there to be a fake alien invasion. And there may come a point in time when they may just show up in mass because everyone here is going to be so zombied out, drugged out, you know, just Borg collective that they won't care anymore. They may start shape-shifting on TV for all they care. The level of contempt they hold humanity, right? And who could blame them? You know what I mean? So anyway, I was talking to this Marine guy, former Marine guy, and he said that he found himself on a bus with blacked out windows. They left Camp Pendleton in the middle of the night. He didn't know anyone else. And they were all wearing these like orange jumpsuits. He was in communications. I used to be in communications when I worked for the military, and he had a crypto clearance, and he just found himself in this project, right? So he gets on this bus with all these presumably other Marines. First they're wearing normal, you know, Marine uniforms, right? The basic Marine pattern uniforms, and he begins to feel drugged out, and then he loses consciousness, and then he comes to awareness, and then he looks around. Now everyone's wearing these red jumpsuits, right? Kind of like prison uniforms almost. He blacks out again. This time he wakes up and he looks at everyone on the bus, and he notices eventually the bus seems to be going downhill. It's going underground, right? They left Camp Pendleton in the middle of the night. They're driving along. He's starting to feel drugged out. Now the bus is going downhill. He looks around the bus. Not only are they still wearing the red jumpsuits, now their heads are alien gray heads. So he's looking around. Everyone is an alien except him. What WTF, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then just everything kind of just unraveled from there. And he, not surprisingly, the poor guy suffered some kind of mental trauma from that. But that's just one example and that's one of the guys that I met at that Milabs support group meeting. And I met other Milabs here who told me similar stories in and out of the military. So what we did was we began, cross-pollinating, inviting them to come to our meetings at Eve Lorgan's house in Fallbrook, just south of Murrieta there, and Temecula. So not only would we have in our meetings people from San Diego County, but people from Orange County would come down, LA, from Vegas, right? So, and then some people from Joyce Spivey's group would come down from the high desert. And so that's where we developed a great understanding. We did a lot of field investigations too, going to these spooky places, going to out by China Lake, going by Ridgecrest, right? I was personal friends with Diane Johnson, who since passed away, if I understand it, if I remember correctly. She was one of the first Milabs to go public. She was told by the military that there is a certain gland in the brain that generates a hormone which allowed her family tree to have visionary psychic type experiences. The military told her that in most humans this gland has either disappeared or is atrophied, right?
Mm-hmm.
But not in hers. And she was a world-class psychic. In fact, she worked closely with a number of law enforcement agencies as a psychic detective, right? So what happened was, as a young girl, and then up into her teen adult years, she was kidnapped alternately. 1 week it would be the Navy, and they would take her beneath China Lake Naval Weapons Center, and then on other weeks it would be the Air Force. They'd take her beneath what was then known as George Air Force Base, but now is run by this huge international shipping conglomerate, shades of Evergreen kind of thing, right? And directly across the street from the former George Air Force Base is a huge FEMA it's a huge FEMA prison with huge high walls and guard towers, the whole 9 yards, directly across. I stood beneath the walls of this thing, right? And George Air Force Base has got a big underground base beneath it, which Diane and others have been taken to, right? So and I bring it back to Joyce Spivey. She had gotten to know one of Bill Hamilton's sources, and this guy was ex-Army Special Forces, Vietnam veteran, who was a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And after the war, he still had his clearances. He got into working in underground bases where there's real money to be made. People forget in the underground bases, you need tiling, you need electricians, you need plumbing, right? And he got the job. He said he worked beneath an underground base, beneath Scott Air Force Base in Illinois. He worked beneath Edwards Air Force Base. He worked beneath China Lake, right? He said, and what was remarkable was, okay, he gave an interview to Michael Lindemann. Michael Lindemann was pretty big in the field back in the day. And Michael Lindemann had interviewed this guy, Joe, in Joyce Spivey's living room, right? Now, they told Joe that they were not going to do anything with the information. They were just recording his discussion for research purposes, right? Unbeknownst to Joe, what Michael Lindemann did was he allowed that interview to be broadcast by radio station KPFA in Berkeley. Now, KPFA, if you remember, was the flagship station for one of my favorite surface level researchers, Bonnie Faulkner, of the old Guns and Butter show, which they heavily censored her show out of existence. But, post 9/11, she had some great, one of the best interviewers out there was Bonnie Faulkner. Anyway, KPFA broadcast this interview that parts of it where Joe talked about his experiences, and one of his experiences was he was part of a construction team working in a secure facility on the surface of China Lake. He said that they passed by this building, and one of his colleagues looked in the window and saw these little grays there, right? So the guard came along, shoot him away, and then they were doing their work there over a span of several days. This guy, colleague, was, curious to say the least. He kept going back to sneak glances through the window at these grays, right? And what Joe, the contractor, said was, eventually he disappeared, and they found his body in Orange County. Okay, they killed him. He said on another occasion, he was working beneath Edwards Air Force Base in a place locals know that Diane Johnson told me about, a place known as Haystack Butte. That's what it's known as at the surface. They have this kind of, I forget what the activity was on the surface, but it had a very innocuous kind of appearance, and no one would have thought twice about it, but it was actually a tunnel entrance to the underground, right? And Joe said that he took an elevator when he was on the surface at Edwards Air Force Base, and he said that you really never know how far you go down, because when the doors open, there's no numbers on the floors to tell you what floor you're on, right? You can only gauge how far underground you are by how long it takes to get down there. And so he said on one occasion, the elevator took him down, and I've been in some of these elevators, some of these extra wide elevators, right? He said on this occasion, and I was listening to this interview, right, on KPFA when I was still living in San Jose. I was astonished, right? So he said that an elevator opened, he got out, he went down a corridor, and then there was huge steel doors that were just on the verge of closing, and he looked inside and he saw two human, presumably scientists, wearing lab coats, looking up, conversing with a 9-foot tall reptilian. And then the doors closed, right? Yeah. Same guy whose colleague disappeared because he was too curious about the grays at China Lake, right? Mm-hmm. And then later on he gets a job working beneath Haystack Butte, beneath Edwards Air Force Base. He looks, at this door that's rapidly closing and sees these scientists, lab technicians, whatever, talking to a big reptilian. Okay, now that story broke in early 1990s, because I heard it when I was before I moved from San Jose to San Diego. I heard it on the radio. As fate would have it, years later, I get to know Joyce Spivey, where we're having all these MyLab discussions and MyLab group meetings. She tells me that interview was conducted right here where you're sitting, right?
Oh, wow.
I knew Joe personally. He was my friend. I'm the one that introduced him to Bill Hamilton. And then Michael Lindemann comes along, Johnny Come Lately, and then really pissed off Bill Hamilton. Because Bill Hamilton said he was my source first. And then, he records this interview with Joe, and then he puts it out through KPFA. And then Joe put the word out. He said, Michael Lindemann is not welcome here in the high desert anymore. If I see him, he's in trouble, right? Oh, because of all the trouble you can imagine that Joe had experienced, right? Anyway, Joyce Spivey told me that interview was done right here. I knew Joe. He told me his whole story. I'm the one who interviewed him, introduced him to Bill Hamilton, and somehow Michael Lindemann found out about him, right? So, the point of relevance to all this is these stories about underground cavern systems, underground bases, underground civilizations, they go back into antiquity. And then in the early part of the 20th century, 1940s, thereabouts, we began having the Robert Shaver mysteries, and a big part of his story was the Deros, these underground, cavern dwellers, messing with the people on the surface, right? If I remember the story correctly, the Shaver mysteries. So, point being is that stories of underground bases, underground civilizations, and some of these underground civilizations being quite hostile to humans, they go back to antiquity. The only difference now is there's a modern twist to it, because what happened, I believe, and I'll leave it at this, and then we can talk some other time. I'd love to have you guys on my show sometime.
That would be great.
Yeah, and what had happened was these hybridized bloodlines had been in charge all along, at least since the aftermath of the latest series of celestially driven cataclysms, which factor into this important, very important point that people have to wrap their minds around, that our solar system is subject to cyclical celestially driven cataclysms, whether it's because, as is the case now, when a large Planet X type body comes into the solar system and causes all these problems. Professor James McCanney talks about action at a distance. It's an electric universe. We don't need to have a planetary impact in order to have all this chaos and destruction, because the plasma electric universe, nature of the universe, the correct model, these extra large bodies coming in from outside the solar system cause problems with our sun, which causes problems with the rest of the solar system. And then there are other things that have happened in our solar system, cosmic wars, right, which resulted in the destruction of a very large planet. Some people call it Maldex, some people call it Tiamat. Depends on the culture, depends on the time, in antiquity, right, and the sources. The Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish, talks about this, right?
Mhm.
So, we've had cosmic wars here. We've had celestially driven cataclysms. And the last time this happened, these celestially driven cataclysms, and there's more than one type. The galactic superwave coming from the galactic core, large Planet X type system coming in, Nibiru, call it what you will. It was roughly 9 to 12,000 years ago. They can last for quite some time. And after the dust settled, there was far less humans on the surface. And in the lore of all these cultures on the surface, the Native Americans, the Cherokee, what have you, the Hopi, they talk about, when it's time for another cleansing, purification, they go underground or they go onto a high mountaintop, right? Depends on the nature, because if it's a water, so deluge, inundation type thing, they head for high ground. If it's going to be fires raining down from the heavens, they go underground, right? It depends, really. And I would go underground anyway, no matter what it was, because that would be a lot safer down there. So, in the aftermath of the latest series of cataclysms, and we're on the cusp of those again, right? There was far fewer humans on the surface for these reptilian and other alien genetic engineers to manipulate. So they began creating this hybrid species that I've been talking about, but they also created a hybrid species of themselves that they can incarnate into, that they can consciously work through, right? These became the priesthoods, these became the fraternal orders, these became the secret societies, right? And so all along there was a sub rosa secret society hybridized element. And when all these saucers started crashing, and there's persuasive information that suggests that 1897 even, there was a crash in what we now know as Dallas-Fort Worth area, the so-called airships. There was a big UFO wave of so-called airships in the 1897, 1896 timeframe. And then I've had Paul Blake Smith on my show, and he's talked about the UFO crash at Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 1941, right? And he also talked a lot about, and I've had him recently on the show talking about Eisenhower's meetings with aliens. But anyway, so this notion of the recovery of alien technology and interacting with beings that are found in these crash sites, survivors also including, we know that the sub-rosa hybridized human element knew about them all along. So then, because the program to back engineer and study and exploit this technology kicked into high gear, it was the same hybridized elements that secretly ruled anyway that took charge of these operations. Surprise, surprise, right? So that then you fast forward today, you have aliens working in unison with humans underground. Everything is extremely highly compartmentalized. I've had Jim Goodall on the show twice. He's a world-renowned aerospace expert, world authority on the SR-71 Blackbird, F-117 stealth fighter, and he's developed sources at Area 51. This came out in the series of exposés by George Knapp back in the day, the UFO cover-up, right? Where Jim Goodall talked about what his sources in the Air Force told him briefly about what was going on at Area 51. And one of his sources, it turned out, was Ben Rich, the late legendary director of Skunk Works, Lockheed's Advanced Development Department. And Ben Rich told him, we have things that are 50 years beyond your comprehension. He didn't say 50 years beyond your understanding of aviation or 50 years beyond your understanding of engineering. He said 50 years beyond your understanding, right? And in what amounted to a deathbed interview to Tom Kelleher, who was an aerospace consultant for MUFON, Ben Rich said, yes, we've been working on this stuff. There are two types of UFOs, ours and theirs being the aliens. And he talked about how the propulsion systems and the navigation systems were powered by thought. There was a mental cybernetic connection between the pilots, the occupants of the craft, and the navigation. So they didn't really have to push buttons. It was all automatic. It was, thought that was guiding these craft. And he said that the military was already traveling the stars, that this technology will never see the light of day. He said that it'll take an act of God to pry them out of the special access programs. Typically what happens is these craft are recovered by the military. They go to a secure military facility for initial analysis. Sometimes I think factions of the military will keep these, but often as not, the craft technology is eventually turned over to private, i.e. corporate hands. Lockheed, Rockwell, et cetera, et cetera. That's where it winds up, and who owns them? The reptile Rothschilds and Rockefellers again, you see? So it all comes full circle. So as far as disclosure, the long-winded way of getting around to answering your question, they'll never tell. They'll never tell.
Never.
Oh yeah,
Never.
we've got craft, we've got technology that'll end our energy needs forever. We have medical means to cure everyone, prolong human life. All that? No. If they found something in a craft that would heal everyone, they would weaponize it and turn it into something to kill everyone. That's how these reptiles think.
True.
And so, I'll leave people. I don't want to leave them with a grim thought, but to be forewarned is to be forearmed, right? And however that cliche goes. It's starting to dawn on people that there's a non-human element behind all this. If one studies, and a lot of information has come out, which my colleagues and I have talked about this stuff for decades now, about what's starting to be found inside some of these treatments, these little hydra tentacle thingies, and the graphene and all that stuff. It's like there's nothing, and the AI element behind all that. There's nothing, and the fact that they're transceivers, senders and receivers of information. There's nothing remotely human about that. Okay, so we're seeing not only depopulation, but the potential exists that even after people die after these treatments, the potential exists their very consciousness could be trapped forever in some form of like a Faraday cage AI quantum cloud, where they just spend eternity in some weird hellish Tron-like existence. Okay, that we're talking about the potential for that now, right? So if people still think they're just up against some power mad bankers, no, they've told you over and over through Hollywood and through literature, what have you, about all their sordid practices, all the gruesome evil stuff. Just study what some of these satanically, demonically inspired serial killers have done, like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, and then just think, okay, this is what the elite are like. The so-called hybrid elite who own everything and are behind this whole agenda, this is what they're like, and the reason they're like that is because they're not human. Okay, they're hybrids of these reptilian Draco creatures and other beings, because ultimately the reptilians, Draco, Mantis, they're getting their strings pulled too, right? And I won't get into this show about what we think at least one of those types of beings are, because it probably stretch the credulity of some viewers and listeners enough as it is. We start getting into,
You start getting into
gosh.
octopus creatures.
I would just give a hint that I'll go on Netflix and watch My Octopus Teacher.
See?
Oh my
I was gonna
gosh.
say yes.
Oh my gosh.
Watch.
Jim,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, before we start wrapping things up, I wanted to ask you a question. you're so connected with obviously the aliens and other cryptids, and you've actually seen things with your own eyes. I absolutely 1,000,000% believe in everything you're saying, like the connection of it all. Do you feel like you can actually call upon these things and they will come to you?
Sometimes UFOs will manifest specifically. I wouldn't call it a dog and pony act, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when they will appear to you and you only, or other times they will appear to you even if you're in a crowd. You're the only one that perceives them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they will do these types of things, and some people more often than others, right?
Yeah.
For me, it could be subtle and nuanced, sometimes not so subtle and nuanced. And the key is discernment. It's channeling is taken on a pejorative meaning for serious UFO researchers, when in fact people have been channeling all along. All these adepts and warlocks that are in these secret societies that are not even really human anyway, they've got all kinds of metaphysical powers. And what about all the shamans and the medicine men, medicine women, and all these elders in the native communities, right? They're talking, they're communing with, and essentially that's what ayahuasca is all about, is to be able to be plug into these, essentially from our perspective, normally unseen hidden realms, but because under the influence of the ayahuasca, they're able to plug into that reality, what Carlos Castaneda talked about as separate reality. And I would encourage people, if they have the time, to read those books. They were great books. So the term channeling is taken on a negative connotation, but one must be discerning. If some being starts telepathically talking to me and says it's like the Count Saint Germain, or Archangel Disney or something, I'll know, okay, you got the wrong guy. All right. And I have a defense mechanism. If I start getting these weird messages, then I'll blast them out. All these Motown hits in my head. I'll start singing Supreme songs to them, right, until they go away. I'm serious, right?
Really?
Or I just start, in my mind, I just play these ripping guitar solos from Michael Schenker back in the UFO days, right? So
They just leave you alone.
they'll just leave you alone. But unfortunately, some people, they get caught up in the magical hoochie coo of it, and they start doing all this grid work with crystals and stuff, which they're not really doing for the benefit of humanity or the planet. They're doing it to open portals for all these negative entities. So the point of relevance is, absolutely, myself and my colleagues have had over the years interactions, information received, and it's always up to us to determine the validity and the veracity of the information. And the information we receive isn't some cryptic kind of obscure kind of like a riddle or something. The information that we've gotten over the years has been quite accurate, right? But then again, because I think that some of us, and again, I don't say this in an elitist fashion, I think some of us are boots on the ground. A lot of our past parallel incarnations, we were essentially aliens, for lack of a better term. And we chose to go into the cycle of reincarnation to be here at this critical time. But we still have connections with our extended ET families, right, of higher dimensions, right? So I do believe that, and there has been ongoing conflict amongst various ET empires back from the beginning, the Orion Wars, etc., etc. It just took this long in linear time to get to our little corner of the multiverse, where they had essentially a captive population to work with. And they know that there's a celestially driven cataclysmic reset every 9 to 12,000 years for them to do these kinds of things, because they know the Planet X is real. I've seen it from 35,000 feet, flying over Central Asia when I was headed off to the very first Reptilian conference near Manchester, England. I saw it. It was a big red top half of a red dwarf sun that was poking above. From my perspective, at our altitude, it was poking above the perma-chemtrail haze, right? The real sun is over here, and this thing is here, right? And then I've also seen it numerous times on the ground. I've seen pictures. I've studied surf cam photos from Fraser Island, Australia, from Surfers Paradise, Australia. Those websites have been taken down because of people like me, right? And they use certain types of chemtrails that have, I don't know what kind of oxides or whatever they use, but so the underside of the clouds are dark. They know what the projected track of the second sun is across the sky, so they lay out these chemtrails to obscure the parts of the sky where the second sun will be visible. If there was not a perma chemtrail haze, everyone on the planet would have seen the second sun by now, right? So anyhow, just leave you with that thought, and I'd love to have you gals on my show. And
That would be
I
great.
really
We would
enjoyed
love
talking to
that.
you.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been absolutely amazing getting to talk to you. You have so much information. It's awesome.
All right.
Little ones up. Perfect timing, Dad.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you gals later, okay?
Hey,
Yeah.
signing off now.
Yeah,
Until
thanks
next
for
time.
joining us.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Thanks, James. Bye, guys. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.
Can I just hang up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Woohoo!
That was awesome.
Isn't he
Great
a wealth
show.
of information?
Oh my God.
He's just
He has, like, it's like everything that I believe in and everything that swirls in my mind because, you know, I'm huge in aliens, Bigfoot, cryptozoology, all of it. And every single thing he talked about was like the same, the exact, every single thing I think about it, the way I think about it, the way I feel about it, the way it all connects. And it just blew my mind because you don't really find that many people who feel the exact same way. And then it's hard to find someone who's like,
oh yeah, by
so much knowledge.
It's like, what about Dogman? Oh well,
I know, right? He jumps right in there.
Yeah.
It's like,
and he's even seen one. That's crazy.
For someone to have alien experience, Dogman experience, Bigfoot experience, and probably more. Like, I'm not even sure he knows exactly what that sideways creature thing was. Like, what was that? Walk like a crab. But
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised so you remember they got him as a little kid and they put I wouldn't be surprised if they put tracking devices that give off a signal so that other dimensionals can pick up on these signals. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of us other ones have had, because I grew up in the area that he's talking about. And I used to wake up with bloody noses, massive bloody noses and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of us do have these tracking devices where interdimensional beings can pick up on those signals. And that's why some people can see things and you know, have more experiences. But it was kind of crazy that he said that they actually breed people to be like sheep.
Oh, when he said that, I was just like, oh my God, we've been talking about this lately, about how it's like the hybrid of different creatures and humans, and, you know, how we feel about it and what they are and the reason for it. And yeah, it's fascinating. So you, James, have a plethora of information, and I am beyond fascinated by everything you have to talk about. And I can't wait to be on your show, and I can't wait to talk to you again, because it's like, I feel like I'm sitting here and I can't get enough.
I know we can't get enough, but
I can't get enough of him, because he knows everything that like we want to hear and talk about, because it's all the same stuff we believe in. So I'm blown away.
Paranormal.
It's
so
amazing.
Anyone that's interested, you can go to his website, the Cosmic Switchboard, CosmicSwitchBoard.com, and he just has articles, interviews, you name it. You will find everything you're looking for on there. And then if anyone has any questions for us, we'll go ahead and have him on again. And this time we'll have some questions for him.
That's right.
And then, like I said, we'll be on his show too, and that'll be great. He'll let us do the talking, and that's always fun.
Yeah. So, and thanks everybody for joining us, everyone that came on and watched us live, and then everyone who will watch us later. Thank you for watching. He is amazing to talk to, and I can't wait. I can't wait to talk to him again. So until then,
everyone have a great night. And I think we're having Michelle LeBaron on this Thursday.
That's right. Can't wait to talk to her.
Everyone stay tuned for that. Yeah. And then the week after, I think we do have another alien person.
Oh yeah, that's right. Dr. Robert. Yep. And I'll tell you more about him later, but he is coming on in a couple weeks, and he has so much information. Matter of fact, when James was talking about someone being so far advanced in their thought process of like where things are, he is that type of person too. So I am beyond excited to have him on and talk more about aliens. So this has been a great episode, and I'm like leaving this with just a a mountain of information in my head. But the funny thing is, it's like he believes all the same stuff that I do. And I love that because it feels like it's validation to everything that, we talk about and believe in anyway. So yeah, that was awesome. But thanks again, James, for coming on, and we look forward to seeing you again. And I guess for now we're signing off, and hope everyone has a great night.
And have a great Halloween, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween, everybody.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.